Mom, hurry! I can't hold it any longer, I whispered, my voice trembling with urgency. My heart pounded as the gravity of the moment settled in. Every instinct urged me to stop, to pull away, yet the way she looked at me, the unhurried grace in her movements, made time feel as though it was slipping through my fingers. Was it too late to turn back? Would we regret what was about to unfold, or was this the beginning of something irreversible? Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video till the end. This story is about to get incredibly interesting. My name is Logan, and I'm 20 years old. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood surrounded by trees and green spaces. My dad, Thomas, married my stepmom, Victoria, 2 years ago. She was always kind to me, but there was something unspoken between us. A silent tension we never dared to acknowledge. Growing up, I never sought attention and preferred to keep to myself. But everything changed when Victoria entered our lives. At first, it was subtle, the way she smiled when greeting me, how her eyes lingered a little too long when we crossed paths. She always seemed friendly, but I sensed there was something deeper behind her kindness. At first, I brushed it off. She was my dad's wife, after all. But as time passed, I started noticing other things. How her gaze flickered nervously when I came home late. How her laughter seemed louder when I joined the family for dinner. These little things were easy to ignore, until that one summer evening when everything shifted. It was a hot, humid night, and my dad was away on a business trip, leaving just Victoria and me at home. I spent the afternoon lounging on the couch, flipping through old magazines while the sunlight cast long shadows in the living room. Victoria was unusually quiet that evening, humming softly in the kitchen as she prepared dinner. I had always admired the effortless way she moved, seemingly unaware of her beauty. But that night felt different. As I glanced at her, something inside me shifted. She looked more alone than ever before. I had seen her countless times, but in that moment, she seemed different. The way her blonde hair fell over her shoulders as she chopped vegetables caught my attention in a way I hadn't expected. I stood up, stretched, and walked into the kitchen, unsure if I even wanted to say anything. But as I approached, she glanced up, her blue eyes meeting mine. This time, her gaze felt different. Intense, lingering, more than just a casual look. My heart raced, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Is everything okay?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Victoria blinked, her expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. "Yeah, I'm just tired, I guess. It's been a long day," she said, turning back to her task. But even as she continued chopping, I could still feel her eyes on me. I watched her for a moment, the steady rhythm of the knife slicing through the vegetables almost hypnotic. It was hard to look away. "If you need help, just let me know," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I didn't know why I said it. It wasn't like me to be so forward. But the tension in the room pulled something out of me, something I had kept buried for years. She smiled, but it was tight, uncertain. "Thanks, Logan. That's sweet of you." I nodded and turned to leave, but before I could step away, she spoke again, her voice softer. "Actually, if you don't mind, could you help me with something? The sink's been acting up. I think the pipes are clogged. You've always been good with that kind of stuff, right?" I froze, caught off guard. Victoria never asked me for help with anything beyond simple tasks. Her request sounded almost too casual, yet something about it felt different. Before I could overthink it, I found myself nodding. "Sure, I can take a look," I said, my voice thick with hesitation. I followed her to the small bathroom off the kitchen, where the sink was located. As I crouched down to inspect the pipes, I could feel her presence behind me. Her footsteps were soft, yet each step echoed in my mind, making my pulse quicken. I tried to focus on the pipes, but my thoughts kept drifting back to her. I could feel her standing there, watching me. The air between us was thick, charged, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. As I worked, I suddenly felt her hand on my shoulder. "Do you need help?" she asked, her voice low, almost tender. Her touch lingered for a moment, sending a ripple through me. I straightened up, and for the first time, our eyes locked. There was something vulnerable in her gaze, something I had never seen before. She looked unsure, almost fragile. The tension in the room was suffocating. I had to fight the urge to reach out to her. "No, I think I've got it," I said, barely above a whisper. But inside, I wasn't so sure. My mind raced. What was happening between us? Why was I suddenly so aware of her? For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between us, heavy and unbroken, as if the world outside had come to a halt. The only sounds were our breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then, without warning, she stepped closer, her hand still resting on my shoulder. "Logan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been thinking about you. About us." Her words sent a shock through me. My heart skipped a beat and I stiffened, unsure of how to respond. What was she saying? What did this mean? My thoughts spiraled in every direction. "I don't know if this is right," she continued, her voice trembling, "but I can't ignore it anymore." And with that, everything shifted. I could barely process her words. My heart pounded as her confession echoed in my mind. "I've been thinking about you, about us." It left me feeling both confused and drawn to her at the same time. Victoria's hand remained on my shoulder, her warmth seeping into my skin. For a moment, I didn't know whether to pull away or lean in. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the outside world seemed distant, irrelevant. The space around us felt smaller, the air thick with something unspoken. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "What do you mean?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. I was unsure, confused, but deep down, something in me needed to hear her answer. She hesitated, her eyes flickering downward before locking onto mine again. In that moment, she looked fragile, as if she had been holding on to this secret for far too long. "Logan," she whispered, stepping even closer, so near that I could feel her breath on my face. "There's something between us, something I can't explain. Something that's been growing since we met." She paused as if gathering the courage to continue. "I know this is wrong, but I can't stop thinking about you." Her words lingered in the air, delicate yet overwhelming, as if the slightest movement could break the moment apart. My mind swirled, each thought more conflicting than the last. This was my stepmom, someone I had lived with for 2 years. She had always been kind, always respectful. But this was different. This wasn't just kindness. It was something deeper, something I had never expected. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it all. "Victoria," I murmured, barely above a whisper, taking a step back. "This isn't right. You're my stepmom." She closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing the weight of my words. But when she looked at me again, I saw something in her gaze, a mix of desire and desperation I couldn't ignore. "I know," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But it doesn't change what I feel. It doesn't change what I want." There was a vulnerability in her voice, a plea that unsettled me. Then, slowly, she reached for the hem of her top, lifting it slightly, revealing the soft, pale skin beneath. My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to shrink, the space between us vanishing with every heartbeat. I could feel the tension thick in the air, pulling me toward her. Every part of me screamed to step away. But there was another part, one I couldn't ignore, that wanted to stay, to see where this would lead. Her hand reached out, and for a fleeting moment, I felt it, something undeniable between us. My own hand twitched, instinctively reaching for hers, but I stopped just before our fingers touched. The moment felt delicate, fragile, and I didn't want to shatter it. "Do you feel it too?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The way everything shifted when we were alone like this, the way the air seemed charged with something unspoken. I nodded, the weight of truth pressing down on me. I had never felt so conflicted. Part of me wanted to run, to push these feelings aside, to protect the family we had. But another deeper part of me couldn't deny it. The connection, the pull, the chemistry. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Time seemed to stand still. Each passing second felt heavier than the last, the silence between us thick and unyielding. The only sound in the room was our breathing, yet the tension was growing with every heartbeat. Then finally, she moved closer, her hand gently grazing my waist. Her fingers, soft against my skin, sent a shiver through me, and I froze, unable to react. Her face inched nearer, her breath warm against my lips. "Logan," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Her lips hovered just inches from mine. "I need you to know, I never meant for this to happen. But what I feel for you, it's real." Before I could process her words, before I could fully understand the weight of what she had just confessed, she kissed me. It wasn't hurried, nor was it desperate. It was slow, deliberate, like she had been waiting for this moment longer than either of us had realized. Her lips were warm, gentle at first, but as the kiss deepened, it became more intense, more consuming. The world outside disappeared. There was no past, no future, only this moment, only the undeniable energy between us. I found myself kissing her back, my body betraying the chaos in my mind. A flood of emotions, desire, guilt, longing, overwhelmed me all at once. My hands instinctively found her waist, pulling her closer. She pressed against me, her body soft and warm, responding with equal intensity. Her fingers wove into my hair, tugging me toward her, as if we were two pieces that had finally fallen into place. Every touch, every kiss felt like a revelation. It was wrong, forbidden. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The only thing I could focus on was the way she tasted, the way her body moved against mine, the way everything else melted away when we were together. Her hands traced the back of my neck, sending a shiver down my spine, as if our bodies were completely in sync. Time seemed to stop, the world outside fading into nothingness. The kiss grew deeper, more urgent, and my mind swirled with confusion. She was my stepmom, my father's wife. This should have never happened. But the way she kissed me, the way she held on to me, made it impossible to think straight. For what felt like an eternity, we lost ourselves in the moment, our breaths coming in shallow, uneven gasps. And then, finally, we pulled away. Our eyes met, wide with the weight of what had just happened. I don't know what to say," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. "This is wrong." Victoria's expression softened, and she took a small step back, giving me space. "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling with her own conflicted emotions. "I never meant for this to happen. I don't know what to do, but I can't pretend this isn't real." I stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. My skin still tingled from her touch, the memory of her kiss lingering on my lips. My mind was a whirlwind of guilt, confusion, and something I couldn't quite name. "But we can't," I started, my voice barely audible. She cut me off gently, shaking her head. "I know," she said softly. "I don't know what this is either, Logan. I don't know how we got here. But I can't pretend like it didn't happen. I can't act like there's nothing between us." I searched her face for answers, but I knew she didn't have them. The room felt suffocating again, the air heavy with everything left unsaid. Finally, I spoke, my voice unsteady. "What happens now?" Victoria hesitated, her gaze flickering to the floor before returning to mine. "I don't know," she admitted. "We'll have to figure this out, but I need you to know that I care about you, more than I should. But I do." Her words were raw, vulnerable, and there was no mistaking the sincerity in her voice. The guilt was suffocating, yet I couldn't ignore the undeniable pull between us. Whatever this was, it was real, too powerful to simply push aside. "Maybe we can't go back to the way things were," I whispered, my throat tightening. "But I don't want to lose you." She stepped forward again, reaching up to gently touch my cheek. "We won't lose each other," she promised, her voice filled with quiet intensity. "But we have to be careful. We have to be sure that this is something we can handle." I nodded slowly, knowing that whatever came next, it wouldn't be simple. It would be messy, complicated. But in that moment, I couldn't deny that something had shifted between us, something that neither of us could ignore. As the night stretched on, we didn't speak much about what had just happened. There were no easy answers, no simple solutions, but I couldn't stop thinking about her, about us. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of something neither of us had anticipated. The weight of everything lingered between us, pressing down like an invisible force. I couldn't stop replaying the moment, the kiss, her touch, the way it felt as if the rest of the world had vanished. But now, in the silence, reality was creeping back in. There was so much I didn't understand, so many layers of complication I couldn't ignore. Victoria was my stepmom. The guilt was suffocating, but the feelings, those were undeniable. "Victoria," I began, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't even know what I wanted to say. How do you explain something like this? How do you make sense of something that feels both impossible and inevitable at the same time? Her gaze met mine, and I saw my own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. She was just as lost in this as I was, maybe even more. "I know," she whispered, her voice tinged with sadness and longing. "I never wanted this, Logan. This wasn't supposed to happen. But now that it has, I can't just act like it didn't. I can't pretend you're not everything I never thought I needed." Her words cut deeper than I was prepared for. Everything she said was raw, honest, and it only made things worse, because I felt the same way. I felt the pull of something I wasn't sure I had the strength to resist anymore. "You didn't mean for this to happen," I said, my voice unsteady, thick with emotion. "But it did. And now? What do we do?" Victoria looked away, her lips pressing together as if searching for the right words. I could see the turmoil in her expression, the way she was caught between the love she had for my dad and the undeniable connection that had formed between us. This wasn't just attraction. It was deeper, something neither of us knew how to handle. "I don't know, Logan," she admitted softly. "I don't know what happens next. But I do know I can't pretend this was a mistake. I can't act like there's nothing between us." Her voice wavered, and I saw the way her eyes glistened, holding back tears she wasn't ready to shed. The vulnerability in her matched my own. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her, but I was terrified of what it might mean, of where it could lead. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to destroy our family. But I can't deny how I feel. And every time I try to stop thinking about you, it just doesn't work." She nodded slowly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't want to hurt anyone either," she whispered. "But what do we do when the person we're supposed to protect is the one we're falling for?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. It felt like we were standing on the edge of something too powerful to ignore, something we had no choice but to face. But the more we spoke, the more we realized right and wrong weren't as clear as they once seemed. They were tangled up in emotions, in longing, in regret. There was no turning back. We both knew it. "I don't know what to say," I muttered, stepping back, my mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. "I don't know what happens next, but I can't stop wanting you." Victoria exhaled shakily, shaking her head. "Neither can I," she admitted. "But we have to be careful. We can't just rush into something we might regret. We need to think about this." But even as she said it, I could see the way she looked at me, the way she wanted me. The pull between us was undeniable, no matter how much it scared us. The rest of the night passed in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The distance between us wasn't from a lack of closeness. It was from the overwhelming weight of the situation. We were trapped in a moment neither of us knew how to escape, but it was a moment we couldn't erase. When I finally went to bed, sleep refused to come. My mind wouldn't quiet. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about us. Victoria was my stepmom. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it had. And no matter how hard I tried to fight it, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, the tension lingered. Unspoken glances, awkward silences, stolen moments of hesitation. We tried to navigate the mess we had created, but no amount of distance could change what had already been set in motion. Because no matter how wrong it was, the connection between us wasn't something that could be undone.